It was still dark over Washington when the president sat alone in the Oval Office. The city outside was quiet, almost peaceful, but inside the room, the air felt heavy. On his desk lay a thin folder, no seal, no signature, no official markings. It wasn't supposed to exist. He had been told not to make copies, not to discuss it, not to ask where it came from, only to read it. Every president is warned that power comes with responsibility. What no one ever says out loud is that some truths come with consequences so severe that once you know them, your life is never the same. This was one of those truths. When he had entered office, the nation believed in him. He spoke about transparency, accountability, and restoring trust in government. Americans saw him as calm and principled, a man who respected the Constitution and the limits of power. What they didn't know was that within weeks of his inauguration, he would be shown a version of America that never appeared in speeches or textbooks. It began quietly. A senior intelligence official, someone who had served presidents across decades, stood across from him during a private briefing and said something that stayed with him ever since. "Mr. President, from this moment on, you will learn things you cannot unlearn." At the time, the president nodded politely. He believed he was prepared. He had seen classified information before. He had made difficult decisions. But this was different. The first documents described operations that had never been publicly acknowledged. Decisions made without congressional approval. Actions justified in the name of national security but carried out far beyond the boundaries of law or morality. Some of these actions dated back decades, others were still ongoing. What shocked him wasn't just what had been done. It was how carefully the system had been designed so that no single president could ever fully stop it. The deeper he read, the more isolated he felt. These were not matters he could discuss with his cabinet. Congress could not be informed. The American people could never be told. The system relied on silence not because the truth was unknown, but because it was too dangerous to share. Power, he realized, did not always sit where the Constitution said it should. Late that night, long after his advisors had left, the president remained at his desk. The White House staff had gone quiet. Outside, the city slept, unaware of the decisions being made in its name. He reached the final page of the file. At the bottom, a single sentence stood alone. Disclosure of this information may result in irreversible consequences. The president leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. For the first time since taking office, he questioned whether honesty was always the right choice. Whether truth, in its raw form, could actually destroy the very democracy it was meant to protect. If the American people knew what he now knew, would they still believe in their government? And if he chose silence, would he become complicit in something he could never undo? That night, the president understood one terrifying reality. Knowing the truth did not make him more powerful. It made him more trapped. And this was only the beginning. The next briefing did not take place in the White House. Early the following morning, the president was escorted through a restricted entrance beneath Washington, D.C. There were no cameras, no announcements, no official record of where he was going. The elevator descended far deeper than any public floor, deeper than most government employees even knew existed. When the doors opened, he stepped into a world built entirely for secrecy. The room was small and windowless, lit by soft white lights that revealed nothing beyond concrete walls and a long metal table. Around it sat men and women who did not introduce themselves. Their authority was not written in law books or earned through elections. It came from continuity. They had served administrations long forgotten. They would remain long after this one ended. One of them slid a thick folder across the table. "This," the man said calmly, "is what you were not elected to control." The president opened the folder and began to read. What he saw challenged everything he believed about oversight and accountability. The documents detailed covert operations carried out without public knowledge, without congressional debate, and often without legal clarity. Foreign governments destabilized quietly. Psychological campaigns designed to influence entire populations. Actions officially denied while privately celebrated as necessary victories. "These are illegal," the president said, looking up. No one argued. Instead, another voice answered, steady and emotionless. "They are necessary." That single word carried enormous weight. Necessary had justified wars. Necessary had justified surveillance. Necessary had justified actions that would end careers, destroy institutions, and fracture public trust if ever exposed. As he continued reading, another realization settled in one far more disturbing than the operations themselves. The system was not broken. It was functioning exactly as intended. Oversight committees were briefed selectively. Judges approved requests without full context. Information was compartmentalized so deeply that no one outside this room could ever understand the full scope of what was being done. Responsibility was diluted until accountability disappeared. The president had always believed that the Constitution placed ultimate authority in the hands of elected leaders. What he now understood was that authority had been distributed in a way that made it nearly impossible to reclaim. One document outlined future operations already planned years in advance, budgets allocated, legal frameworks prepared, layers of approval designed to survive changes in leadership. "You're telling me," the president said slowly, "that even I can't stop this?" The answer came without hesitation. You can delay certain actions, you can redirect priorities, but you cannot dismantle the structure. It does not depend on any single individual. The machine did not answer to presidents. It answered to momentum. Then came the most difficult revelation. One file described actions taken against individuals not based on crimes committed, but on threats predicted by intelligence models. Some of those individuals were American citizens. The justification was cold and precise. Prevention is more efficient than response. While R growled, the president felt his chest tighten. This was not policy. This was philosophy. A belief that safety justified preemptive action, even when it crossed moral and constitutional lines. "How many people know about this?" he asked. "Very few," someone replied, "and fewer who remain comfortable knowing it." By the time the briefing ended, the president understood the impossible position he was in. If he spoke out, the system would survive without him. If he stayed silent, the system would continue with his approval. There was no heroic choice, only damage control. As he stood to leave, one of the officials offered a final warning, almost sympathetic in tone. "Every president believes they will be the one to change this. History suggests otherwise." The elevator doors closed behind him as he ascended back toward the surface. Above ground, life continued as normal. People went to work, children went to school. Flags waved peacefully in the morning air. They had no idea how close their democracy lived to the edge of secrets. And now, neither did the president know how to live with what he had learned. After that day, the presidency changed for him in ways no one could see. Publicly, he continued to smile, to shake hands, to deliver speeches filled with optimism and confidence. Privately, the weight of what he knew began to reshape every decision he made. Every briefing felt different. Every recommendation carried a hidden cost. Every silence felt intentional. He began to notice patterns. Certain topics were discouraged, not directly, but subtly. Advisors would hesitate before finishing sentences. Intelligence briefings would skip details he knew existed. When he asked questions that went too far, the room would grow quiet and the answers would become vague. The message was clear. There were boundaries even the president was not meant to cross. At night, sleep became difficult. His mind replayed the documents, the charts, the calm voices explaining actions that would horrify the public if ever revealed. He wondered how many presidents before him had sat in the same chair, staring at the same truths, wrestling with the same impossible choices. History books described leaders as powerful decision makers. What they never described was how often those leaders were managed, guided carefully toward acceptable outcomes. Pressure began to mount, not in the form of threats, but reminders. He was reminded of political realities, of upcoming elections, of fragile alliances, of economic stability. Each reminder carried the same underlying implication. Disruption would come at a cost far greater than silence. One evening, during a private conversation with a trusted advisor, the president cautiously tested the boundaries. What would happen, he asked, if certain information were made public? The advisor paused longer than usual before responding. "There would be consequences," he said carefully. "Not just for you, for the country." That answer unsettled him more than an outright refusal ever could. The president realized something crucial: then truth was not being hidden to protect the people. It was being hidden to preserve stability. And stability, in this system, mattered more than transparency. As weeks passed, he noticed his access subtly changing. Briefings grew shorter, certain documents arrived already summarized, others stopped arriving altogether. He was still the president, but the flow of information had become controlled. It wasn't punishment, it was containment. One afternoon, while reviewing a national security report, he discovered a redacted section he knew should not have been redacted for him. He requested the full version. It never arrived. Instead, he received a visit. A senior official, one he had seen in the underground briefing room, sat across from him in the Oval Office. His tone was calm, respectful, almost reassuring. "You've been carrying a heavy burden," the man said. "We want to make sure it doesn't become heavier than necessary." The president understood what was being offered. Less knowledge, less responsibility, less risk. All he had to do was stop asking certain questions. That night, as he stood alone looking out over the darkened city, the realization settled in fully. The system did not need to threaten him. It did not need to silence him forcefully. It simply needed his cooperation. And cooperation, he now understood, was how power truly functioned. The American people would never know how close their leader came to challenging the very structure meant to protect them. They would never see the compromises made in quiet rooms or the truths buried beneath layers of classification. The president had reached a turning point. He could continue to resist quietly, knowing it would change nothing, or he could accept the limits of his power and live with the consequences. For the first time, he questioned whether the presidency was ever meant to be fully in control. And as the pressure tightened around him, one terrifying thought refused to leave his mind. If this was happening to him, how many others before him had chosen silence? The pressure did not arrive all at once. It tightened slowly, like a quiet force that gave no warning but allowed no escape. The president began to sense it in small moments. A policy proposal that never reached his desk, a recommendation that arrived already filtered, meetings rescheduled without explanation, nothing overt, nothing dramatic, just enough to remind him that resistance had limits. Then came the moment that changed everything. A foreign crisis erupted unexpectedly, at least. That was how it appeared to the public. Intelligence reports flooded in, advisors filled the situation room, cameras waited outside, hungry for statements. The president was briefed on possible responses, each one framed as urgent, unavoidable. But buried deep within one report, he noticed something familiar, a detail that didn't belong. He recognized the pattern instantly. This crisis had not been entirely unforeseen. Pieces of it matched projections he had seen months earlier in the underground briefing room, scenarios that had been discussed quietly, academically, as if they were distant possibilities. They weren't possibilities anymore. They were reality. The president asked a simple question. Why wasn't I informed this was coming? The room fell silent. Eyes shifted, papers were adjusted. Someone cleared their throat. Finally, an answer came, but it was not the one he expected, because this outcome was considered acceptable. That word again, acceptable. The president felt something inside him harden. This was no longer about abstract systems or theoretical power. Lives were now directly at stake. Decisions made in secret had crossed into the real world, and the consequences were unfolding on screens across the globe. He stood up. "For the record," he said firmly, "I do not approve this course of action." The silence that followed was different from before. Heavier, colder. An official spoke carefully. "Mr. President, the process is already in motion." "In motion can be stopped," he replied. The official met his gaze, not without consequences. This time, the warning was no longer subtle. That night, the president made a decision. He ordered a delay. Nothing dramatic, no public announcement, just a pause long enough, he hoped, to reassess, to regain control, to remind the system that he was still elected to lead. The response was immediate. Markets reacted. Allies called. Advisors urged caution. Headlines began to speculate about instability and indecision. The narrative shifted quickly, expertly, as if it had been waiting. By morning, the delay was being framed as weakness. Inside the White House, conversations grew tense. Support thinned. Trusted voices grew quieter. The president realized he was being isolated not politically, but strategically. The message was unmistakable. Challenge the momentum, and the momentum will turn on you. Late that evening, he received another visit. The same senior official. The same calm expression. "You've made your point," the man said gently. "Now it's time to consider the larger picture." The president stared at him. "The larger picture includes the Constitution." The man nodded. "And survival." That word lingered between them. Survival of institutions. Survival of stability. Survival of the system itself. The president understood then what this confrontation truly was. Not a battle between right and wrong, but a choice between control and chaos. He dismissed the official without responding. Alone again, he looked at the photographs on his desk family, moments of hope, symbols of why he had sought office in the first place. He wondered how many leaders before him had reached this exact point, convinced they could bend the system back toward accountability, and how many had failed. The next morning, he reversed the delay. Publicly, it was framed as decisive leadership. Privately, it felt like surrender. But surrender did not bring peace. It brought a question that refused to fade. Had he just prevented disaster or ensured that it would happen again? After that decision, things appeared to return to normal. The crisis faded from headlines. Markets stabilized. Allies issued carefully worded statements of support. Commentators praised the president for his resolve, for choosing pragmatism over hesitation. To the public, it looked like leadership had prevailed. Inside, it felt nothing like victory. The president noticed that the pressure eased not because he had won, but because he had complied. Briefings resumed their familiar rhythm. Advisors spoke more freely again, though never crossing certain lines. The system, satisfied, loosened its grip. That was when he understood the final truth. The presidency was not about controlling power. It was about managing the appearance of control. The knowledge he carried did not disappear. It stayed with him in quiet moments, during late-night walks through empty corridors, during speeches where he spoke of freedom while knowing how carefully it was constrained. Each word felt heavier than the last. He considered more than once what would happen if he spoke out near the end of his term, if he used the authority of the office to reveal everything, if he trusted the American people to decide for themselves. But every path led to the same conclusion. The system would survive. The truth would be questioned, dismissed, buried under doubt, and the damage to institutions, to trust, to global stability would be irreversible. History did not reward chaos, even when chaos was born from honesty. As his presidency moved forward, he made smaller choices instead, subtle ones, delays framed as caution, redirections justified as efficiency, quiet limits placed where possible, not enough to dismantle anything, but enough, he hoped, to slow the worst outcomes. It was the compromise no one would ever know he made. On his final night in office, long after the farewell speeches and ceremonies, the president returned once more to the Oval Office. The room was empty, stripped of personal items, waiting for the next occupant. He sat at the desk and looked out at the city. Millions of people slept peacefully, believing in a system they trusted to protect them, believing that their leaders knew what they were doing, believing that democracy functioned exactly as it was supposed to. In many ways, they were right. And in one crucial way, they were not. He left behind no confession, no hidden letter, no secret recording. Only a legacy shaped as much by silence as by action. The next president would take the oath. They would be escorted into the same rooms. They would be shown the same truths. And they would face the same choice. Because the most powerful secret in American history was never a single operation or a single decision. It was the understanding that knowing the truth does not always set you free. Sometimes it binds you forever. And somewhere deep beneath Washington, the system waited patiently for the next person to learn that lesson.